This module is a complete introduction to talismanic elections. That is the art of choosing the right moment of time to create a planetary talisman, or really any astrological talisman that actually works and creates real results in our lives. In this lesson, you'll learn how to evaluate a moment of time, i.e. the astrological election. And so we start with understanding key terms, identifying the main planetary significator, and assessing its dignity and strength, understanding the role of the moon and other celestial bodies in the elections, mainly the 9 classical planets, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Mercury, Venus, Moon, and the lunar nodes, North Node, South Node, or Rahu and Ketu, and recognize what aspects further either aid an election's results or detract from it. Overall, we will be drawing from 12 key principles drawn from classical sources like Picatrick, while also grounding them in real examples and application. So you can immediately start looking at charts and finding elections for your own talisman. Just a little bit of context before I begin if you don't know me. Hi, I'm Josh, or Lama Karnata. I am a Buddhist Lama, which means I'm not just a teacher of the meditations and philosophies of Buddhism, but also the methods and practices which are considered to be mystical or even magic. And one of my particular interests is that of astrological magic, particularly the art of creating astrological talismans, which ensouls spirits or moments of time into physical objects, so our fate can be ignited to the whims of our desire. The following was recorded over several sessions of my tell-all talisman making workshop and mentorship, Catching Starlight. Part of the session goes over a worksheet I created for everyone, which goes over key terms from the Western astrological magic tradition. We also go through a series of election rules and review some example charts. You can also find a link to download the worksheet below if you'd like to follow along. I hope you enjoy. Welcome, everybody. For our next session, we're going to talk about elections today and election principles. And then based off of where we're at as a group and a team, we can drill more down into practice with elections or fighting elections, reviewing electional principles. So kicking around those ideas. And then once we start kicking around and thinking about the election aspects, that's pretty much nearly the complete set of the 3 different principles that we need to be thinking about in order to create a great talisman. I think after that, it just has to do with piecing it together and putting it together in the ritual itself. And then those are some points that we can discuss. With the elections, I think there's the most nuts and bolts. And, this past week, I've been going through so many different, just like other little tips and other little rules that exist within Picatrix, though we pretty much most of it is contained in these earlier parts of chapter 2, which we spent a lot of time in. Today, module 5 is electing the talisman. And so the main things that we're going to be doing, we're going to be discussing elections. We're going to be reading from Picatrix, and we're going to be reviewing charts, and we're going to be applying some of the principles. We're going to be going through the principles a lot today. I'll use this image because there's this whole tradition of like reconstructionist ideas of Arabian astrologers and the tools that they used. So a lot of the time periods that they're depicting with these telescopes actually never actually existed. This is like a European idea of what it was like. So this is like a fun little historical point that I always, I find quite charming. That's why. But we have another sheet that I'm going to be using, which I had shared with us in order to go through the particular principles. Alrighty. Last year I had a big, holiday extravaganza party at my house that I host every year for Halloween. And one of our presenters at North Star was there, Aiden Wachter. He's also teaching a class. So we had a really fun conversation, me, him, and Eric Perdue, who's also teaching on Agrippa, doing a deep dive into Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy, about just the nature of catering to who one has attending. One never knows the experience levels of who's going to be attending a class, or depending on experience levels, people need different things. I think I've been pleasantly surprised how well prepared and well educated everyone has been in this. So this is I'm definitely been learning a lot in terms of that. So part of this document includes jargon and base level terms one needs to know. Everyone here is pretty well established in astrology and familiar with astrology. So I don't think we need to spend too much time for the posterity of it. I will go through it, and for the recording, because not everyone actually is an astrologer who's taking this class, and we'll go through that. But it's been easier than I was expecting. There's a gentleman, he was a Jesuit priest, and I think he's known as like a seminal writer in the world of phenomenology, Walter Ong, Father Walter J. Ong. And one of the things he talks about is that like the emergent knowledge and experiences people and cultures and just groups have based off of the language that they end up using. And this is very much mirrored in that of the language. There's like a language of astrology. There's a language of organic chemistry. There's a language of phenomenology. And so for those who maybe aren't as familiar, and as we're going to be going over some terms and thinking about terms and how they relate to elections, I challenge you all to lean into the discomfort and lean through it and try to learn it. Because, in the first chapter of the Picatrix, it talks about that those who attempt to learn this art will learn it, and the secrets want to be revealed. So this is part of it. This is part of like the struggle in which to learn and for which to embody the knowledge. So it should be a little prickly at times. And I think for me, whenever it has to do with terminology, I always have to just wrangle my brain around just the ocean of terms in order for it to start sticking in a matrix. Like if you're making a crystal in the lab, you agitate it in a solution. And then after the agitation, the particles start to coalesce and they form their structure that the atoms naturally want to form. So this happens a little bit with the knowledge. The knowledge takes a structural shape. And there's a lot of knowledge in the structure of electional astrology and electional astrology for talismanic magic. So we're going to go over terms, and we're going to go over sort of cheat sheet lists on factors to make sure an election has, as well as the things that you want to particularly avoid. And these are all sort of pulled out from these early chapters of Picatrix, as well as some of the later chapters. And then we're going to do a little deep dive reading through and some close reading of the chapter 2 from book 2. I believe it's chapter 3, and then maybe one other one, depending from Picatrix. But we'll have that as time allows. So certainly when it comes to talismans, planetary significator, this is a word that's used a lot, and this is one of the most important parts. And this relates, if there's a term that directly relates to our grand desire and what we've been talking about, it is this planetary significator, which is simply, what's the main focal point of the election? What is the planet or the stellar body that you're using to empower the election with? So if it's a Jupiter talisman, the planetary significator is Jupiter. You really care about the condition and the relationship and the aspects of the planet that is the main significator. So there's a lot that goes into that, but this is a classic term. How does one evaluate that? And then essentially one is evaluating it through calculations of dignity and ability. So measuring of the strength and status. We very much care about the strength and status of the planets, of the main significators and the secondary significators of the election. And we have some great charts to share and things to go over in terms of, if you're not as familiar with essential dignity and essential dignity systems, strength and status systems, we have, lots of tables and charts. So one can begin to embody that information. And depending on the kinds of talismans, one may have a preference for a certain kind of dignity. If you're making, a decan talisman or a face talisman or a term talisman, one particularly cares about those specific forms of dignity rather than domicile or exaltation. And depending on the result, one wants the planet to be in a specific form of dignity. Then we have some general terms which does relate to dignity and ability, which is this afflicted and unafflicted planets. Afflicted planets are harmed by hard aspects, Caden houses, combustion, or the malefics themselves, Saturn and Mars. While unafflicted planets are just free of these harms, or maybe even supported by benefic planets like Jupiter or Venus. If a planet is particularly receiving benefits or in a good condition, maybe one would rather call it blessed rather than just simply unafflicted. Sometimes there is a clear showing of a blessing a planet is receiving. And then for those of us that need a refresher on aspects are also something that will depend, or the qualitative preference main planetary significator has via aspect to another planet. The preferences in a talismanic election will sometimes change which text that you're having. So sometimes the textual sources will prioritize just the fact that a planet is making any aspect to a benefic planet, and they'll say that's good. while other sources will prioritize the nature of the aspect itself. So a square or opposition to a benefic planet is an affliction or is unfortunate, while a trine or a sextile to a malefic planet, this is good. So it slightly depends in that way. I generally tend to be in the bucket of any sort of applying aspect to a benefic planet. I generally am a fan of if the planet is in good dignity and not afflicted. If it's retrograde, not good news. If it's in exile or in detriment, generally not as good either. So there's some caveats, and we'll have to review them as they come up. There's so many different specific rules to be like this exception, this exception, this exception, this exception. But it's less important, I think, right now, especially depending on your level of how many elections you've had to find or you've had to look through yourself. Like having a solid foundation and then trying to look at charts, reviewing charts, getting feedback on charts, and then learning those exceptions as we go on. Because there's, a near infinity of exceptions. What is it? The 10,080 combinations of just the 7 planets and the signs that we talked about last time, that the author talks about. Picatrix also has interesting preference. It has some very interesting specific rules for the lot of fortune. So it really likes to see that the lot of fortune is in certain terms, which is kind of fun, kind of interesting. It's not necessarily a rule that I have been, I would say, the best at following and or drilling down to make sure all my elections have it, but it's certainly like an important thing to note in terms of like, oh, is this unlocking like the most power of this election? Probably should be more heavily considered. And it's something I need to commit to doing more of. Angular houses, feeling very comfortable with angular houses, 1st, 4th, 7th, 10th houses, seeing that the planets here have particular influences. I think we'll read a passage where Picatrix is talking about the nature of those houses as well, which is great. But we see this very clearly in our elections in which we are making talismans where the planet is either rising or it's culminating. So it's either in like this 1st house position or this 10th house position. Relative speed of the moon. This is also a very interesting and contentious point, I would say, among those who make talismans. Fast moon is moving like more than 13 average degrees a day in daily motion. It's supposed to quicken results and strengthens the elections, while a moon moving slower than 12.5 degrees of motion a day is a slow moon. And then some people will refuse to make a talisman at all if the moon is under 12, moving 12 degrees without a mitigating circumstance. So this is also something we have to take a look at. We do care that aspects are applying or separating. We had a little conversation, I think, last time or maybe the Q&A about like combustion and Kazemi and, what's going on in a talisman where something like that is happening or it's approaching Kazemi or just leaving Kazemi. This is also something to take a look at. But hopefully, I think later on we'll talk a little bit more about applying and separating aspects. But this is also where just a knowledge and practice of the elections without a thorough understanding of like the philosophical underpinnings of what's going on in that quality of time, it really benefits each other. It really benefits from a thorough understanding and a cohesiveness of the cosmology. Because if you are having, and Cliff has even talked about this before, I think I was reading a post he made on it where we generally want the worst things in our lives to be things that have happened and that are going further out of our mind. We're being further influenced by, while we are increasingly being influenced by more joyous, beneficial qualities. And so we can have a proxy of this sort of scenario, falling away from malefic influences and a growing of benefic influences. We can see this in the chart. And depending on what our goals are, we may want to architect for something a little bit more specific with that, which is quite good. Oh yes. And then regardless if the planet, if the main significator is going to be on the ascendant or ruled by the ascendant or not, the quality of the ascendant and the ascendant's lord, this is something that we talk about a lot. So this is why it's in the glossary here. So we'll want to care about the ascendant. We'll want to care about the lord of these. And then also the natural significations, the natural designations of benefic and malefic, meaning Venus and Jupiter as benefics, malefics, generally Saturn and Mars as kind of planets of ruin and conflict and destruction, and the conditions of where it's difficult for life to sustain itself. These are all the terms that I think are sufficient and are necessary and would give sufficiency in being able to elect, a good talismanic election. Any questions or thoughts or points on the terminology itself? We're going to go into how they end up getting used, but this is just on the terms. I think we're all pretty caught up. All right. So, gosh, I think in William Lilly's Christian Astrology, he has a fun little table. This is the first time I ever saw anything of like a little point system of like rating how strong or how good of a condition a planet is in based off of essential dignity and accidental dignity. Accidental dignity being like the dignity of place and position, which house is it in, what time of the day. Also thinking of things like sect, I think, fall into this. There is some reference in Picatrix to, I think it is to sect in it as well. So they are thinking of these things. But gosh, this is about, what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, 10, 11. About like 24 different points to evaluate in an election, which I would say give you, and there's more than these 24 points that one could sit down and evaluate and try to check all the boxes. But this is like a nice essential 24 points that I think if one is able to, check the box on all 24 of these, this is a much better than average election. Or at least this is much better than what I see people sometimes make, or at least like the beginner. This takes you out of the world of like beginner or trying to figure it out to like, wow, this is a by the book, quite a solid election. And then if something, which is important to do, not just for the reason of like, oh, you have to do it right, or you have to do it according to these rules. But I would argue and say that it has to do with, in order for us to understand our result and the nature of our result and to figure out, well, is it the material that's going wrong or the ritual that's going wrong or something about my mindset or the way that I'm approaching this that's going wrong? We need to be able to rule out the election, or we need to rule out that the election was a major contributor to the reason why something has maybe gone awry. And then if you nail all these points, then have been able to see that there's a consistent result that is being made because of it, then you can start playing around with some of these other more specific criteria, which we're going to get into a little bit. And then if you understand this, then when we go in the future over petitions and see like petition elections, then I think we get a better understanding of like, well, just what is it that's going on when we're doing this kind of magic. Any thoughts or points before we go into start going through the checklist? All right. So the first thing that we need to make sure of is the strength of our planetary significator. So we need to make sure our main planetary significator is dignified. We're talking domicile or exaltation. Some people will make triplicity term or phase talismans, especially decan or phase talismans, though they have specific rules for that. Gosh, in this way, but we're not making peregrine talismans. We don't want to be making afflicted talismans. This is like number one most important rule. If the planet is not dignified, then we don't want to be encapsulating its virtues and energies and having that be pumped out into our lives. Even better if we can get that significator to apply to a benefic planet, Venus or Jupiter, or the lot of fortune, really elevating and exalting that position of the main significator. Once we have determined that the nature of that the significator is strong, we want to look at the condition of the moon. Picatrix is very, very big on and has lots of thoughts on the quality of the moon and the place of the moon. We live in the cosmological idea of the celestial spheres. We're living in the sublunary realm. We're living in the world under the moon. So if the moon isn't happy and the moon isn't going to be on our side, then cannot mediate the beneficence of the other planetary daemons in this way. So the moon ideally should also be dignified, or at the least unafflicted, and applying to the significator, or benefics, or the lots of fortunes, and then also in an angular house, or the 5th, the 11th. There's also some interesting house rules Picatrix has. And then we want the moon to be fast. So the moon needs to be fast, and it needs to be unafflicted. Now, not only do we have to care about the moon, but we have to care about the moon's lord. The moon's lord also needs to be unafflicted. Ideally, it's also aspecting the main significator, meaning like the planet we're making the talisman, like maybe even the planet we're making the talisman of or form, or the moon itself. See, in this, and then the next part we need to look at is the ascendant lord. Extra lucky if the ascendant and the ascendant lord is the main significator of the talisman. This is like quite nice because then you've already had to figure that out. But if not, then ensuring the ascendant lord is inflicted, because the ascendant lord and the ascendant is representative of the mage, the individual, the working at hand. If this is weak, then it is not going to go to fruition. There's even parts in Picatrix where it does say something like, especially in reference to the moon, and so one has to think it does apply in a couple of these other ways in terms of the significator, but having the lord's, like the moon's lord, cadent from it, these are aspects which start off strong but end poorly. And a weak ascendant or an afflicted ascendant can end up having this situation. A lot of early on talismans that I had made or tried to make where they didn't turn out well, or maybe they ended up breaking, or once given to somebody, they didn't pan out well. They had some of these combinations, including like a weak ascendant, which was like starting off strong, but ending poorly, or not continuing to work at the end, which, potentially is fine. Sometimes we need results now and we'll figure something else out down the road. And that's also something we get to toy around with and play with. But as long as we know that's there, that we have a slight, structural deficit that we'll need to remedy and fix later, that's fine. That's good. As long as we're aware. Then some extra bonus ones. We can have Venus or Jupiter on the ascendant. Picatrix loves having a benefic on the ascendant, Venus or Jupiter like this. Depending on your level of, it's not really risk tolerance, but, one can have some other ideas about, if a planet is behaving like a benefic and it's very strong, maybe a planet like that on the ascendant would also confer good results to the election. Like a sun in Aries, or I think comes to mind, or even like a strong Mercury in Gemini, even on the ascendant of an election. Like, do you think this will be good or beneficial? Think it'll detract from it? Again, this is when we have to think about the purpose of the election and the other associated virtues. But regardless of that, the Venus and Jupiter on the ascendant do add beneficial buoyancy to the election. This is also an interesting principle that's buried around, which is like, if the significator is ruler, this is something to think and consider, especially based off of our conversation of like functional malefics and benefics based off of our natal chart. And some people like to heavily focus on this aspect of that there is some root in the natal chart of these talismans, or they're trying to bring out a rooted aspect into the natal chart. And so seeing that this significator is going to help with aspects of my second house or aspects of my fifth house in this way. And then if the ascendant lord is dignified, then this further strengthens the election. So before the other point is just that at the very least, we don't want the ascendant lord just like, in the middle of the UFC ring in gladiatorial combat. Like, we don't want it to be having a hard time. It's fine if it's just, run of the mill normal, because, in a way, or results uncertain. We're always kind of living in a results uncertain way, potentially. But if the ascendant lord can also be dignified when we're making this is going to very much bolster the results of the election. Any thoughts, questions, surprises about this? Let's go over some of the negative criteria. So things we definitely don't want to have in election. And, for the sake of, wrapping one's head around it, everything is kind of like weighted the same. Like, there's just like a -1 or +1. And this was also, I think, one of the critiques some people have of like William Lilly's numerical designation system is that really some of these like aren't weighted the same. Like, if your planetary significator is weak and not dignified, then you probably really shouldn't be making it. This is kind of, and it's necessary in terms of the necessary versus sufficient. So it's really more than just +1 and more than just -1, from one would say. But in terms of how we can start evaluating an election first, and then drilling down and seeing that the specifics of the situation, then it's going to be fine. Because there may be a case where one is interested in, I don't know too many people that are like making peregrine talismans that are just like otherwise generally supported. I'm not entirely sure of many people doing that, but there was a time where I was seeing that more often than not. And it did seem you could squeak out some good results. But the issue is that we don't want to generally be living like a peregrine lifestyle of, well, I don't know if I'm going to get robbed or my journey is going to succeed. It can be a bit anxiety ridden to live that kind of lifestyle. And if that's the quality of time you're like perpetually pushing out, those aspects seem to outweigh any of the potential benefits. So in this way, we definitely want to and need to avoid having the main significator like debilitated, meaning in fall and detriment, malefic faces and terms, and definitely avoid applying to malefic planets. This is like a big, this is going to probably kill the election kind of situation, even to the point to where applying to planets in retrograde or having like the retrograde also is something that plays quite a significant affliction that you can either have to a main significator and or if that planet is applying to one of these major significators, ascendant lord, moon's lord, main significator lord, we gotta find a different one. Now, an afflicted moon is sometimes enough to kill an election. Definitely need to avoid the moon applying to malefics. Placed in Caden or reverse houses to the ascendant. This is also big. Or malefic fixed stars. I make this point as well because you will see sometimes if like the moon just happening to be conjunct Algol in an otherwise fine looking election does seem to has the potentiality and does seem to kick things into a certain direction. I don't know, maybe some of us that have more experience with Algol or potentially like a lot of good experiences with Algol, maybe a bit more shielded or immune to that. But by and large, there's some interesting behavior that we'll get to see that will happen or a very unexpected result. There is a lot of talk in Picatrix about moon being Caden. This is like one of the specific things that we all should think about. And if we haven't when we're looking at elections, don't like consistently think about this. This is the first one that we like need to think about and begin like wrestling with of like, how much am I going to prioritize this niche rule or not? And it has to do with generally the moon being cadent in an election, and then the moon's lord being cadent from the moon in an election. This is supposed to prevent results from coming to fruition. This being because it's like being kept in a cage. It's like not able to do what it wants to do. That being said, you can use it to basically trap a problematic planet. And if there is like you have like an afflicted Mars or Mars causing problems or afflicted Saturn or some other planet that's making a malefic aspect to something else, but you want to use the election, putting that planet in a cadent house or cadent from the significator that it is aspecting does seem to diminish how bad it is, which is an interesting principle as well. So we can use some of the logic behind these roles in order for us to tilt an otherwise unsavory election into our favor. Practically, I think I have found it's nearly easier for me just to like wait for a better time or wait for a better election, because sometimes you can just find one that's better, and then you don't have to be wasting like time and materials in order to make something that's kind of subpar. But there are situations where we don't have time to wait or one particularly needs it. So the cadent rule is quite interesting. And then the moon being slow below 12.5 degrees of average daily motion. I see people go back and forth in terms of if it's really necessary in order to follow that rule. I have made talismans with very slow moons that have had benefics on the ascendant, which is supposed to remediate the situation. And then I have made talismans that didn't have any remediating factors of the very slow moon. And I would say that the slowness of the moon definitely impacts the election. There's other the elections I've used for talismans that I would have thought would have produced something quite strong, but the moon was slow and there's no mitigating factor, and it wasn't what was expected in this way. So we do have to, I would say, care about the speed of the moon. This is also something else to particularly care about. Yes. This one also is this next principle, the affliction of the moon's lord. This is another principle that I've been surprised to see how effective and how important it is, which is avoid the moon's lord making a separating aspect really to the moon is what I'm thinking. But even the moon's lord making a separating aspect from the significator or the ascendant lord, the ascendant in question, particularly not supported, as well as the moon's lord being placed in a cadent house. So this is again reference to the cadent house rule. I think I have seen that the moon separating from its lord is a much more disastrous, or has a much more disastrous impact than just the cadent house being introduced into the principle. But yeah, but one definitely sees, as a separating aspect representing things that are in the past or that have just happened. These are strong situations of, like, the talisman just makes one skip of the stone. Like, oh wow, that was like a good result, and then it really just never happens again. Or it's like, oh, it seems like it's dead, or it died. Like, what happened? It's hard for it to get consistent results in that way, which is interesting, because is it just our perception of the result versus something else? But it really does seem like the talisman stops working after very quickly. Great. And again, we can go and think of this principle within the ascendant lord. Avoid the ascendant lord making separating aspects from the significator or moon. Then avoid the ascendant lord definitely applying to malefics or being cadent. So this is interesting, because I would say, so there's a lot of rules that sound the same, and it's hard to differentiate maybe within the realm of, I don't know, from like a technical, like spreadsheet mathematical aspect. Like, we're doing a lot of the same calculation here. In terms of what the effects are practically, they're like very different. Where in the moon and the moon's lord, or if there's an affliction in this area, there is this flavor of, oh, the magic kind of worked, but then it stopped. I was able to make contact with these spirits, or these events started happening around me, and then they kind of stopped. Or I was introduced to these people or situations, it started and then it stopped. Where with the ascendant lord afflictions, we'll have situations like, oh, I started to get very tired after using this talisman, or like I developed some health issues, or I started spending my time doing something completely different. And or I thought I wanted to do this, but then I had to change my mind and do something else. It very much is like, hey, it is what the text says, has to do with the individual, with the mage, with the body, with how we're our own intellect and how we're processing things and applying ourselves. It very much is effective in that realm. And because I've seen that, that's why I'm quite a stickler with trying to make the ascendant strong, as well as like fortifying the ascendant and the ascendant lord. Because, gosh, it doesn't matter how good the result is, but if you have a malefic planet that's just like banging down on you, drawing out your energy, or afflicting you, or potentially like hurting yourself or your health in the future, or the health of someone else you give this talisman to, like, truly not good. Truly not good. And these principles were made very clear when I saw early on people accidentally making talismans with retrograde planets conjunct to the ascendant, or retrograde ascendant lords. Maybe they're in a cadent house, maybe not. Or, oh, it should be like a friendly planet or a friendly placement. And it's just, people's lives really getting crippled or going 180s, and not like really unfortunate sets of circumstances. And not seeming like, and we all have unfortunate circumstances that happen. And it's like, oh no, that's like a terrible thing. And like, just because the presence of obstacles does not mean that, something is not worth doing. But ideally, this practice and our practices give us the tools to overcome the things that happen in our lives. And when obstacles arise and we're not able to conquer them, or they're really like giving it to us, then we need to be starting to think about, like, what's going on. Is this worth it? How are these obstacles benefiting me or others? And if they aren't, then we probably should get out of the magic a little bit. Or we need to think about, because certain systems of magic, the obstacles arise or some things happen to us, and it's like part of the game. It's like part of the system. Like, there's a reason why it's happening, and that's baked into the process. This kind of magic, sometimes I think there definitely are levels of, once the talismans have been working and the spirits are doing their thing, then there's some testing that goes on, and sees like, all right, well, do you get to go to the next threshold of blessings and power and influence? And then things will happen. And then one can skillfully, architect the situation and respond and it works. But not everything is like that. And especially if you can look at your election and there's some bad significators in that election, some bad principles, and then bad things are happening to you. It's not a test. You didn't unlock some really cool, great, magical thing that no one else has figured out. It's like, you know, anyone, do I think of myself smarter than the sage Picachurch who compiled everything in this book? Absolutely not. I have a mind poisoned by modernity to whatever degree it has been. And it's like, these people were doing nothing but this kind of work, like all the time, government sponsored and like put up and like pretty nice accommodations. That's like a different kind of way to be approaching this in that way. So, I'm a person that tends to trust the opinions of experts and the opinions of those with expertise. And I consider the author of the books as having considerable expertise that's worth considering over, one person than someone else's like idea of themselves mixed with bad observable results at the same time. So that's a little bit of the thought process. But really guard yourself against afflictions to the ascendant Lord. I think if there's like one like major thing to like take away from this, is like you have to guard against your ascendant Lord at every single level of the material of the materials that we talked about. Potentially, one would also say it matters the most the closer, like the least permanent of the material, because the effects of it can be faster. There was an individual in the community that was making a bunch of materia and just like giving it away. They're just like making a bunch of oils and making about a ton of stuff and kind of like forcing it upon people. And, people would come to me or I just get messages randomly, like on Twitter back in the day when Astro Twitter was a thing. And they're like, oh, I got this thing from this person. What do you think about the election? And it's like, oh, it's like this ascendant Lord is like, it's not just like unafflicted or like not in the best place. It's like fully cursed. It's like, this is something that by the book, like what is the nature of the situation? It's like, this hurts people. Like this kills you. Like this isn't good. And then this was a fun one. Interesting. Cause I think it was like a fixed star. It was like a fixed star oil or something. It's like an Antares oil. And otherwise, besides this like critical, terrible flaw, it seemed like kind of okay. And then they're like, well, I spent $60 on it and I don't really want to like throw it out. So I'm going to use it. And they used it on like this cross country, like moving trip that they were going to do. And I remember like asking them about it later and they were like, yeah, I'm okay. It was pretty terrible. I like got like an argument with my partner. Maybe they like broke up like as they were like traveling across the country, but the car broke down and they got in like all these arguments throughout the entire time and like really sleep deprived. Like it was dangerous. It was a dangerous situation. It wasn't it wasn't magic that to put in. And it was like, this was a better experience. It's like, we added this into the concoction and, I wish it was different. And so, thankfully nothing truly bad happened, but they were using it for a while and it was turning parts of their life more into that, which isn't like what we want. So I very much, caution against the Ascendant Lord. And sometimes I have played around with this and I think the closest I've let this happen is, I think there were some Regulus talismans I made, and I made them with Mars on the Ascendant with a, fixed star culminating. And just to see, and I remember, what is it? I would just describe it as like supreme, like inflammation. Like you can feel like the boiling of the blood, like the boiling of the prana or the energy. Or for me, that's how it came across. And, sometimes it's nice or intoxicating to be having like an experience based off the magic. But, this is why like the intellect is so important, and like studying these rules and kind of like more of like a mathematical or like objective way is like important, because there's a human side, which kind of maybe doesn't matter just the fact that like something is happening that's so like powerful and strong. It's like intoxicating and it's great. And it's like, wow, it's like gunpowder. It's like, wow, look at this explosion. Like this is so powerful. We could probably use this for so many different things, but you can also blow your fingers off. And we're not in the realm of blowing our fingers off. Oh yes, which is why I then make the avoid Mars on the Ascendant in this one. I think there's even a specific place in Picachurch where they talk about these throwaway points, like, oh yes, and then Mars, never make a talisman with Mars on the Ascendant. But then you have to think, well, how do you make a Mars talisman? Because you need it to be rising and culminating. And then you have this situation where it's like, I guess if you were to line up all the rules, Mars talismans are best made or should only be made, you know, on with midheaven placements. And so then you really have to care about the ascendant rules. So this is an interesting point in that way. I don't know. It's difficult. I think I am partial a little bit to Mars on the ascendant. Talismans are like it, but is it hidden poison that will be my ruin at the end of the day or not? I'm not entirely sure. We'll we'll find out. But I don't have a ton of those talismans anymore. And then definitely avoid retrograde or afflicted planets on the ascendant. This is like the condition of the ascendant is paramount. Like if you want to really hurt yourself or others, you afflict the ascendant. And like retrograde planets on the ascendant, not good. Like there's like a terrible thing recently that there's like a post that was made that someone, I don't think I ever knew them, but a number of other people in the talisman making community knows them apparently. And they just like passed away and it was tragic. And they're like young. Like I can't, like they're definitely young. And they were doing stuff like making like Mercury retrograde talismans and stuff. And it's like some of it seemed to be because like, oh, kind of like, oh, I heard it in a dream sort of thing. I think one of the people talking about it is trying to say that like some other prominent astrologer like told them to do it. I doubt that. And then, there's always some beef involved between people in the professional world. But the point is that like this person did pass away. And even at its worst, I would say, oh gosh, definitely let's not let a side of ourselves as like a desire just for defiance of like rules and systems to be the reason why we accidentally, I don't know, curse ourselves with magic. Like if we want to be defiant and exercise those aspects, let's do it like, I don't know, let's like feed some homeless people or like rescue a dying animal or like stand up for someone who people are picking on. Like, let's do it in that way rather than something that really just detracts our own health and our own life and prevents us from, I don't know, being better. Because even if maybe he didn't actually make talismans that like cursed himself, he at least became so obsessed with these talismans and these rules and these systems of like, oh, I'm going to do it differently and I'm going to in this way to where like in that and of itself is like a pattern and an obsession, which like isn't the right way to apply. I would say it's not the right way to apply our intellect or apply the way that the gifts that we have. If we are entering into this magic and have the ability to understand these things and we're able to start getting some tastes of it, let's not like flip it on its head or disrespect it before we're able to really see what it can give us. If we just do it the right way, or if we just do the first action instead of just assuming that we know what the result is going to be. Pro humility, I would say, in the terms of the rules. What is it? Because, I think final point, I'd say it on this, but I have to say it because it really colors so much of like how I do this and why I do this. But it's like, I did a traditional Japanese martial arts since I was like 17 until about that pandemic. So quite a number of years. Went to Japan, learned Japanese, trained in the Honbu dojo, and like, which is like the world headquarters dojo, and like the head of the martial arts lineage, Masaki Hatsumi, Bujinkan, Budo Taijutsu, Art of the Divine Warrior. So fucking loved it. Great. Ninja school, samurai school, weapons, jutsu, that sort of thing. It was fucking awesome. And, he would always say, because it was like 9 different family lineages, like under together. He'd always say, like, think about how many people had to die for this technique to be passed down. Because this was like in the Warring States period. This was like bandits could come and just like kill you. And this was stuff of like, well, how do you learn as the farmers that need to fight against like the daimyo samurai, which are like the professional soldiers. Like, how do you protect your life? How do you protect the life of your loved ones? And it's like the only reason why we're learning this technique in this way is because this is what people learned in order to live. And that there were tons of different techniques and different schools and styles in this way. And, some of them worked, some of them didn't. But definitely if they didn't work, the result was you dying and your family dying and your town dying. And so there was like this just strong feeling of there's a reason why it would matter enough to be written down and passed down. And there's an element of that in this way. And I think Picatrix and a lot of these other texts, they have a little bit of that flavor because, there's all these rumors about, oh, Picatrix, it was so this terrible occult grimoire. If one person looked at it, it would summon all these spirits, blah, blah, blah. And you look at it and it does kind of read like a medieval microwave repair manual of like, dang it, this is like a lot of weird logic and math in here. This is summoning demons? Hilarious. Demons are boring. All the math. But this is, pro humility. A lot of people had to die in order for us to like learn this in the way that we get to now, and how grateful that generally we're not in that such of a threatening position. We get to and what is spit in the face to all of those like ancestor practitioners to take all of the knowledge that they've guarded their entire multiple generations existences, write it down, which they would have dreamed of. We have it. And then we decide something like, no, I think that a Mercury retrograde on the ascendant in a talisman, that's the thing to do. It's like, I'm sure they laugh. I'm sure they laugh really, really hard. And I know Mercury definitely laughs as well, because I watched it happen. But oh my gosh. Yes, we don't need to do that. Don't need to do that one, but which is, oh, perfect. On this topic of hostile angular positions, there are aspects either to the ascendant itself or on the descendant that create these hostile circumstances. And I'll make the caveat again, because we just read last module in Picatrix talking about planets being conjunct the descendant, having this interesting combination of flipping up or down the nature let me rephrase this. When a planet is conjunct the descendant, behaves like a planet in a different level of the hierarchy. So when Jupiter is on the descendant, it's now starting to behave like it. I forget if it was either the Saturn or Mars. I need to reread it, but I made the point of like, no, I need to revisit this because I actually wonder how it plays out. Because I've accidentally made some talismans in the past with planets conjunct the descendant. I famously to me at least, only to me really, famously made a third lunar mansion talisman. The first one that I had made in Saturn it did not pan out well overall. And it took quite a long time for my life to recombobulate, probably about 3 to 6 months. And it was like, this was also early on, so not a lot of influences, but I ended up like meeting this woman as I like walked to the bus. And in the Nigel Jackson image, there is like this image of this woman, and she has like this crazy hair, and it's just like big and flowing, and she's like wearing this outfit. And I kept on like meeting this like older redhead lady with like this hair, kind of like in this Nigel Jackson image. And she was like kind of kooky, and we'd always like talk or whatever. And so like a little bit taste of that spirit in that way. And, they're very supportive of me making the jewelry and supportive of me, studying astrology a little bit. And it was odd. But there's also like a lady that got stung by wasps and all these other things that happened around the time. And it goes to find out that, I had Saturn conjunct the descendant on this talisman. And ultimately it stopped working because I made it for wealth. I made it for things like that to happen. And my professional life went completely more into the toilet. That was like little Josh graduating from college as like a private tutor. I think I was like making $3 an hour aggregate going around to like all my jobs on the bus, tutoring kids with like learning differences and stuff like that. And it was like, my God, I need to figure out something else different. But yeah, that was a complete local minimum, local bottom at the time that I had like made this talisman in that way. And then I had to dispose of it. And I don't think it's next lesson, but the lesson after that. We're going to go through how to dispose of a talisman, how to protect yourself from anything happens. There's also like a very nice prayer that I've discovered and found. Seems to just like kill talismans is like pretty strong. But I think if you did it enough, I think it just like completely rips it up. It's truly, truly terrifying when I had accidentally said this other prayer as like a different purification practice as I was wearing my talisman. And that's like one of the few times where it like started to like kind of like burn me. Like it started to like tingle and burn and like fully flip out my old Aldebaran ring. And then later on, a couple weeks later from that moment, it like broke, like it fully broke. So I think it was quite stressed out by this prayer that I had done, but we'll all get it. And so last resort, we can do that. So definitely avoid malefics conjunct the descendant. Because even in a high level theoretical aspect, we have the ascendant. And this is signifying ourselves, the mage, the working itself. And we want that strong because we want our working to be successful. Who would have thought? So, opposite of that, the ascendant, the seventh house descendant, this is like the enemies or the obstacles to that. And so, if a talisman encapsulates a series of virtues, including the virtues of time of the election, and would you rather have it to be the virtues of, well, I'm strong and kicking ass and just able to effortlessly do whatever I want, versus I'm how I am usually, or I'm feeling a little bit sleepy today, but I have like an enemy knocking on my door, just like ready to give it to me. That's not what we want. We don't want to be Groundhog Day reliving the morning that like our village is getting raided by like Genghis Khan and his Huns after we like slept in from a night of party. That isn't the reality. And it's at least not the reality I want to live in. I'd like to live in an easier reality, but some people, I'm sure, they love the fight. Not I, said the doc. All right. Any thoughts or questions so far on the not to dos or the negative short points? So I want to go over some elections and then read a little bit from the Picatrix, which I think we'll have plenty of time to do both. But kind of talked and meandered a little bit around a lot of aspects surrounding it, because it's hard to get a lot of the context, I would say, just from the principles. But there's a lot of context. Yes, Scully.
I don't know if this is relevant, but I might have to leave early, so I just wanted to ask it now. If I have an election for this Tuesday, can I email it to you for feedback?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Send it to me. I'll tell you.
Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yep. One of the benefits everyone gets is you can just send me whatever you want right now, and then I will just give you my thoughts and opinions and the best quality ones that I can muster. And if you have like a deadline or something, definitely let me know, and then I will quickly prioritize it. Though I am, as I've been telling people, I'm out of the pit. Last week was a full pit of what I was in, work and everything was. So I have left the pit, and well, it's beautiful out there. All right, little practice. So election to use. So this is, gosh, one thing that everyone, too many people I think are always trying to like build like an astrology software app, and then all of them, as I use them as a user, all of them like don't really do it for me. I would say, as someone that just cares about talismans, really, in terms of like a Western chart. I like the sort of the Jyotish software that I use, surprisingly. But gosh, what was the point? So we're here to deal with the situation. So this right here, we have an example of a talisman that I made in 2019, and oh my gosh, yes, this is quite fun. And this was like a good one to use. This was a Sun and Aries talisman. The Sun is strong. Dignified Jupiter applies to the Sun and Moon. Moon is afflicted. Moon is also in the sign of where the Lord is a significator of the planet. So that is like quite nice. The Moon was also fast. Ascendant Lord is afflicted. Moon's Lord is strong. Sun separates from the square it has with Saturn, and it was Sunday an hour. Though we didn't particularly like that Saturn is an angular house, but it is dignified. So maybe it would behave a little bit better in this way. But this was a talisman that, let me see. This is, I think, no, yeah, there's this one. This one is like one of my favorite talismans that I've ever made in my entire life. And this one was made with the image of, specifically, Picatrix has a recipe for the exaltation of the sun, in which there is the woman in a chariot holding a mirror and a lance with a candelabra above her head. And there is, I'm trying to remember if it's in this text or if it's just, I don't know, one of the benefits of talking to people who do this. But there was a conversation I had about how like the secret stone of the exaltation of the sun is peridot. It is this green stone. And I found that kind of interesting because if you watch the sun set at certain parts on the planet, there's actually like this green flash that happens, which is like really cool. I've seen it happen once a long time ago when I was in Hawaii. And so there is their idea of this in the lapidary texts where like these green stones have like these solar connotations to it. And it's like, oh, what's going on in this way? So I can understand that. So I made that talisman, and I would say this one particularly, I will sometimes describe sun talismans having the ability to like rein in and control all the various forces of life, and especially those of all of our other talismans a little bit, and get them to like behave. This one definitely is the one I'm referring to, is this one. So this is quite good. But this is like the anatomy of a good election. So this is something to study and to something to come familiar with. Now, we can also see that, we could still nitpick this. We could definitely still nitpick this because we have, what was it? There was Ascendant's Lord. Ascendant's Lord is, Sun is in exaltation and on the ascendant. So very strong, great. maybe we're getting a little bit of this role of like a benefic on the ascendant, of like, wow, sun in exaltation on the ascendant. This is quite good. Though we're going to look at the natural lord of Aries is Mars. Mars is in Gemini, fine. Second house, fine. But let's look at the lord of Mars, the lord of the ascendant lord. And then we have Mercury in Pisces. And it's like, oh no, Mercury does not like particularly being in Pisces. Is that going to mess our situation up in this way? But it's conjunct to benefic. It's like two factors removed in terms it's the lord of the ascendant. And some people will argue that, planets in exaltation, they end up having they end up taking over like the primary role when they're in that sign. So one doesn't need to really worry too much about the condition of the lord of a sign when it's exaltation, planet in its exaltation. I don't know how I necessarily feel about that. If the Mars was like completely decimated, or if the Mars was in Cancer or something, it's just like, I don't know if I'd feel that strongly about this election anymore. But it wasn't in this situation, so certainly the sun's aspect to Jupiter in Sagittarius at this time, I was quite happy with it. And this was quite good.
Just as a side note, I've done elections intentionally using antitia and contra antitia
Mhm.
aspects, and I feel as if I've observed them
Yeah.
as I expected. I would not have ever used this because of the contra antitia between Mars and Saturn,
Yeah.
but especially being a Capricorn rising, sixth
Yeah.
house Mars person. But I'm happy that like it worked out, I guess, for those who've used it.
Totally.
I think that like that Jupiter Sun trine is doing a lot, I think.
It is. It's definitely doing a lot, and seems to have been doing enough. And I think there's also like an element of like, what is it? And also is like a personal flavor. I enjoy when there's like some conflict in the election. When I enjoy that if there's conflict in the election, and I think that there are other aspects which are stronger than whatever the conflict is. Because I would like there to be like, I'm not naive enough to think that my life will be conflict free. The conflict I do want to have, I would like the deck to be stacked in my favor. So why not make it so whenever a conflict does arise, there's no like talismanic input ability for something else to come in and be like, oh yes, I recognize when there's conflict like this happening, we need to win. We need to overcome it rather than like, oh, whenever conflict arises, we need to step out of it because there isn't like this basis for us to do that. So there's that. I don't spend as much time using antitia or contra antitia, I would say, in my elections. Into the world of my Vedic astrology, there's this concept of Argala, which I quite love. And Argala is apparently very similar to antitia and contra antitia. And it's like, it's spooky to see Argala actually unfold. It's like quite wild because you can analyze it within the timing techniques, and then you see how planets are trying to fruit different results, and it's like, okay, I can get it. And then if you're particularly good at understanding that, you can actually pinpoint during certain time periods planets that will force results or give up result, and then you just strengthen. It seems like you could just strengthen or tweak those aspects, and then it should give you whatever it is that you're like looking for. That's like I don't quite have that mapped out yet. But once I do, I plan to let everyone know because it's like, wow, this is the stuff. This is the stuff. So Jessica, with the what is it? With the contra antitia, does Mars end up start opposing Saturn, or what actually ends up happening?
Conceptually, like that would be like the delineation is that you have a Mars Saturn opposition happening in this chart, even though it's not visible.
Mhm.
But a more these are things that are difficult to articulate, but I guess like a more specific, more accurate, I guess, way of describing it is like it it is exactly that. It's an opposition that is not obvious. If there were like, if that did manifest with this talisman, I would tell people to anticipate
Mhm.
like, you're not gonna have outright conflict. This isn't gonna, like, like, you're not gonna get, like, a massive pay cut from your boss or something like
Mhm.
that. Some sort of second house, 10th house thing, but you might gain authority and very quickly spend anything on yourself,
Mhm.
like, or like that, and you might not see that these 2 things are interrelated, but they are.
Mhm. Great. Excellent. No, thank you. No, I like that a lot. No, that's good. No, I think it's also interesting, like when Saturn is in domicile, it's like time to get that energy in because there's so many parts, especially what it is. I think I think in the petition section of Picadix, it talks about like when Saturn is in Aquarius and then when it becomes retrograde, it's like the worst possible place you could ever find Saturn. So, because it's like this full reversal of like, this is the one time where like the king of the underworld actually going to hear people and like feel a little bit generous. And then when they have that ability and willingness to like engage with the world, and then it flips, it's like, oh no, time to get some major disease going on in this way, which is unfortunate. So, this is interesting. This is quite interesting in this way. No, thank you. I appreciate that. I know some people, they never would have made it because they very much would dislike like the angular Saturn aspect. They were like, no, we can't. But you know, it's about the nature of the time. Yes, that is coloring the nature of the time. But in terms of the nature of the talisman, like one's, I made these out of gemstones, very specific to the sun, not akin to Saturn or akin to Mars whatsoever. So in terms of what is actually being able to be ripped in, pulled in, and incubated, not so much that aspect of it. So this is a way where our images and materials can help us filter and select, I would argue, the nature of the time in which we're making the talisman. This is also something we get to balance. So it's not just all election, not just all materials and images, but it is this merging of things in between. All right, let's see. An election to avoid. Oh yes. Yes. And this one is quite clear. This one, what was it? I said it was sun talisman, but it wasn't. I think someone was trying to make a sun talisman. Yes, this is also a sun talisman. Someone was trying to make a sun talisman. However, and they saw that nice conjunction of Venus and they're like, wow, amazing. Sun and Venus for my Sun and Leo talisman. I love it. Though retrograde Venus on the ascendant definitely destroys this election. Moon is also applying to Mars, which I think they were actually seeing as Venus on the ascendant mitigating that aspect of it, which I don't know. Maybe it does. Probably not though, because it's retrograde. So this is like a really easy one to understand, like not to make, because we have retrograde planet on the ascendant. Doesn't matter what it is. We do not want sudden, quick reversals of our entire lives. That is not what it's not how we build a stable life in any which way. But I'll say that to people and people are like, no, I do want it. I do like it. Like sometimes the intellect of individuals that I've encountered doing this magic or doing it, it's like, one quickly learns that we're doing this for different reasons. Yes. Though otherwise, criteria for the selection, planetary significator, the sun, strong, moon, strong, sun in Leo, amazing. Moon in Cancer, wow, dynamite. Sunday, sun hour, this should be delicious. Was not delicious.
Do you feel any certain way about the moon or the bendings of the nodes in this election or otherwise?
Let's see. Could you explain to me a little bit of the bending of the nodes?
Yeah, it's just whenever the planets of the bendings are just when they're square to the nodes.
Oh, square to the nodes. Gosh, what is it? Well, if they're, from my knowledge, if a planet is square to a node, or it would actually be a natural, like more friendly relationship to the node. So, or at least the interplay between both of them together is like connected. So depends on the status, depends on like the strength and status of your node. Is your node wanting to like fuck shit up, or is your node, like the nodes, it's like, they're not like that straightforward. Like even like a good node, like I'll pull in some other, just some stuff to give a context. We don't necessarily need to implement this for the elections or like believe it, but like a exaltation of Rahu, I use exaltation being in Taurus. And so Rahu is like being very, can be overly concerned with the nature of the world and material success. And so Rahu loves Taurus because it's like, I'm here to eat. I'm here to have progeny. I'm here to just like fully indulge in this. Like I'm in this material place. So experiences this exaltation. And also in this, I use exaltation having to do with like health aspects. So like I had a client that had this place natally, plus they started to run a major time period of their life where this like was particularly flipped on. And it was in the 12th house. So it's like 12th house being like international travel. So it's like this person starts to travel around the world, has like a different understanding of like what their health is like and that they need to be like taking better care of themselves. And they start to do that. And so in that way, like it was like quite good. Though if Rahu wasn't exalted in that place of benefiting their health, it could have gone the other direction. quite easily, especially because like just the nature of that time period in that relationship, it was generally not good. But it was like the status and the exaltation status of Rahu that turned it into seemed to turn it into a much more beneficial time period for them. So that was interesting. So I think generally that's what I would say. I feel about the planets of the bending of the nodes. They're going to get influenced by the nodes. As to a lesser degree than if they were conjunct the nodes. But well, you have to be careful of how they're behaving. Great. Not sure how much I've seen that in the world of talismans, kind of in the same way of like the material is helping select a little bit the ultimate result of the talisman, because in a way we have lots of influences that are you know encouraging us to do one thing or another. It's like, oh, I'm hungry right now, but I'm hungry this now, or hungry right now, or I'd like to have another cup of coffee. It's like, oh, but I'm in this class and we're learning and we're having a good time doing this together. We're not going to immediately stop just to like satiate some other urge that happens. So in a similar way, like the daimonic spirit that of time that is like inside the talisman, these may be articulating hidden or other influencing factors, but they also have their own like mission or intellect and like drive in it. And if that drive is particularly strong, which it should be because of the power of the domicile or the exaltation of the main planet, as well as supporting factors like aspects to benefics and the quality of the moon. If those things are good, then I would feel safe deprioritizing definitely the bending of the nodes. Once one of these significators though, like become conjunct a node, then we start and then we start entering into the world of afflictions to the significators. I think, oh yes, no, this one's fun. So this was like a fun little one of like, would you use this selection? Why or why not? Justify your decision using the criteria that we covered. And this is supposed to be for like a Venus talisman. And it's during Venus hour. So this was a real life question posed. Not recently, but in my lifetime at least. Anyone votes for making it versus anyone votes for not making it.
It's separating from the significator, which is not awesome. And also the moon's gonna apply to Mars next. So that's also not awesome.
Totally. Definitely not awesome. Then what do we think about Venus in Capricorn at 26 degrees Capricorn?
I don't think there's any minor essential dignity for Venus there. I don't think. It's not term.
Definitely not term.
No, it's not face either.
I think most charitable, one can say, oh, I guess they're thinking of day triplicity.
Yeah, she does have that, but I don't know. She's too far away from the ascendant for me.
Oh, I love it. Real good, Justin. Don't see any other reason to consider it Venus. It being Venus hour to consider it for Venus. No, yes. And what a terrible set of criteria to make a talisman just because it is the hour of the planet in this way. And then you bring up an interesting point. This would be a better Saturn election, wouldn't it? Very interesting. Let's see. Is this? It definitely doesn't work as a Saturn election because it is neither day nor though. Gosh, what was it? Too far away from the ascent in terms of being able to. That's like another important point. I would also agree with you, Jessica, in the idea that the Venus being much too far away from the ascendant.
Is the general orb that we use like 5 degrees and it's on an angle?
That's actually a good question. Yeah, I think 5 is a good one to use. I think some people also use like up to 8, but that's pretty wide. 5 is like a pretty comfortable orb. 5 degrees on either side. Fixed stars, it's like a much tighter orb. I think Cliff uses like 1.5 degrees on either side for a fixed star talisman. So it's like not a lot of time. When I made my Capella talisman, I think I had 2 minutes to make it. So I did that. Real
I
tough.
have a question that I don't really know how I'm gonna phrase it, but
Go for
I'll
it.
try to be succinct. So when you're electing and you're presented with a chart that you feel like ticks all these boxes to make a talisman, how much should you concern yourself with if it aligns with the desire versus just like the general, planetary significations? Does that make sense?
Yes. No, definitely. I think one of the first things to ask is, well, do I have, especially if the election looks great and it's like seeming to work as a time for you to be able to make it, then it's a matter of, well, do I have I made a talisman of this before? Yes or no? In your scenario, or in this scenario, does does it not seem like the planet has anything to do with what the goal or desire is? Or is there some seeming or is there some level of congruency?
I think it does. I think it's not even specifically the Venus itself in the chart that I'm, like, considering. It's more like the chart that I'm considering has the moon exactly opposite, like, applying to Venus on the descendant, and
Mhm.
based on what you just said, I think I don't know, I'm gonna have to reread that part, but I'm
True.
concerned/confused how that might not be in line with, like, the specific desire that I've articulated.
Sure. Well, no, mainly because you mentioned on the descendant, like then that I have to say, just like be cautious about the aspect of planets on the descendant, like calling in like the enemy to whatever the goal is, so that or the enemy related to the nature of the talisman. So that's just like a number one thing. And if you're of the opinion or the belief or ability to be like, oh no, any enemy in this thing, we'll just knock it down. Like it's gonna be fine. Like I think it's gonna be strong enough, and we'll just take it. Moon is an enemy. Like the moon doesn't like to fight. Like the moon isn't a good fighter. It's like quite funny. There's like a principle where it's like if one from the ascendant, if the moon is in the sixth, not good. But if there are benefics sixth from the moon from your natal moon, it's great because it means what are the mental enemies you have? Pushovers. And so it's good for your moon when the mental enemies you have are, not really good enemies. So there's like a principle there, which I think is interesting to contemplate. So Moon on a descendant probably less bad than Saturn or Mars on the descendant, but in general, in terms of is the talisman working like all the planets, all of them know it's like all right, team, we're gonna help me save pigeons. I don't care if you're Saturn, I don't care if you're Mars, I don't care if you're Jupiter. Like we know we're all sort of all going towards this goal, regardless of if it's like optimal or if they like want to do it or care about it. Sometimes all the planets can get dragged along to like a very specific thing. That being said, I think I generally prefer and I'm interested in for the first talismans that I made for like the general asks or general use, just because sometimes we may not know like what's the best, or like we may not know just how good things could be if everything was being raised equally. Like if it was just like give me all of the blessings rather than I only want your very specific blessings. Maybe there's a blessing they're like, oh, I could have just given all this to you right now, but you said you only wanted this one. So we're only just gonna drill down and get the one. I don't think it is like there's only it's like it like focuses the beam and makes it a stronger beam towards the one area of life. I think sometimes you can have an experience of it like limiting it. So casting a wide net first and then being more specific. Then being more specific is like a way to go. More along the lines of help me in all the ways that you can. And then it's like, I want to focus on this specific project with you rather than dedicate your limited resources.
Cool.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Great.
Also very moon in, like, just receive.
Mhm. This is also really good because in this I have also, I don't think I mentioned this workflow has to do with like weighing various principles together. And these are more of like sufficiency rather than like necessary. I need to write down like a couple more things and send it out as far as like the aspect of the planet, the main significator needing to be, within like 5 degrees, either north or south of the ascendant or the midheaven. That's also like a critical thing. Like you can't have too far of an orb away from your midheaven or your ascendant, which which is an important point. It also seems to be the case with like planets on the descendant. Like if it's far enough away, I wouldn't consider it actually being like conjunct or on the descent. It has to be pretty tight, or it seems to need to be pretty tight on the descendant to start causing like consistent enemies. But there are some recipes I think for house-based talismans where they really lay into this principle where it says like find whatever is the planet that rules the descendant, like make it weak and make it afflicted. And so in the talisman, you're anchoring in this position of I'm really strong and the goal is really strong and all obstacles to it are just falling over. But all the things everyone said in terms of why not to use this election, you all passed. So very good. Everyone passed. And I would give a general caution to like just making triplicity talismans. The triplicity because because someone could say like, oh, we're looking for Venus and triplicity. And that's what we were going for, except, didn't find the applying aspects to Mars and this way. And the moon being in Taurus is good. But The triplicity doesn't seem to be too significant of a dignity in which people are, really talking about strong beneficial results. So it's like a fun thing, I think, to maybe experiment with, or something if we feel like experimenting with. It probably does confer like some benefit. But in terms of trying to really optimize our first set of talismans that we're making, I would recommend, domicile, exaltation. Let's find something like that confers with our benefit, confers with our grand desire. All right. Now let me take a look at have a little time and go through some pick a tricks before we close out. If there's any other points or questions people are thinking of, please feel free to mention. All right. Now, a reminder, this text again is, I believe it's in the drive. I think I've shared some of these books. Actually, I need to double check. If not, I will get this excerpt and I'll put it inside the insider drive. But particularly, it's book 2, chapter 3 of Picatrix. Last time we had gone over some of these other ones, but Picatrix begins to reveal these aspects of electional principles. Now, some sages speaking of the foregoing have said that the effects of the heavens and their powers in this world are nothing other than the increase and decrease of heat. They have said this because they have not understood the wonderful occult properties of the planets. They have said that the effects brought about by the sun, the moon, and the other 5 planets operating in this world help and strengthen the overall effects of the heavens. They say that the moon has qualities from which it is possible to know and understand that all her qualities and effects, the first of her qualities in her elongation from the sun, that is the period from the time she separates from the conjunction with the sun until her first square with the sun. During this time, her power increases moisture and warmth, but she affects moisture more than warmth. During this time, her effects appear in the growth of trees and plants, and her power of increase is more apparent in herbs that grow in the ground than in trees that rise above the ground. So these are some really great specific points, because essentially, like, we're talking about lunar phases, we're talking about relationship between the sun and the moon, which is this also captured in this term called the Tithi as well, which is very foundational in calendarical systems and calendars of, many cultures, many ancient cultures. Definitely plays a huge role in Vedic astrology, the correct Tithi, the relationship of the phases between the sun and the moon. And so we're seeing that in here in Picatrix. Like, this is like, they're talking about Tithis right now. They're talking about not just the phases of the moon, but specifically in relation to the sun, and how this is also fine tuning the purpose of the election. So this is something to revisit and to study and read probably like a couple times, just to get an idea of other principles that are happening. And so, back in the day, farming is like excellently important. So there are recipes for farm talismans and grown crops. This would help refine the outcome of that kind of a talisman. The second of her qualities is from the end of the first quarter until her opposition with the sun. During this time, her influence is more apparent in increasing heat and moisture equally. Her influence is well shown in the increase of moisture and heat in plants and minerals. When she recedes from opposition to her second square with the sun, at that time her power increases moisture and heat, but heat more than moisture. Her influence appears more in increasing the bodies of animals, vegetables, and those minerals that grow in all their parts. This is why at this time she works more by heat than by moisture. So this is describing the qualities of the sun. So I'd recommend reading through this section. I wanted to get, they spend a lot of time talking about the relationship between the sun and the moon. And mainly, the conclusion we ought to draw from all that we have said to this point is that everything in this world and all their qualities, orders, and ends are from the aspects of the moon with the sun, because this includes everything that is contained in trees and composite bodies because of the stars and the moon. This is what causes the greater part of the influence and harm they receive from an eclipse of the moon or other planets that are eclipsed. From the sun, the moon, and the fixed stars come permanent mutations. From these, things suffer change, receiving benefits from good qualities and harm from bad ones. Eclipses affect the sun and the moon and other planets and influence them to the harm of other composite bodies. Do not believe for a moment that the sun or moon receive any harm in their natures or accidents thereby. And we will call this an impediment of the heavens, so that you will understand that the reason that harm comes to animals, trees, and other composite bodies from eclipses of the sun, moon, and other planets happens because the 4 elements are altered, changed, and damaged. And if you read the first part of the on minerals, the De Mineralibus, that's been added to the drive, then you're already familiar a little bit with this concept of like the Aristotelian and Platonic cosmology of the natures of the elements and how the stones and all of reality are made up of, these 4 or 5 like primordial elements. And this influences their constitutions and is the basis for the occult virtue. If one understands the elements in which something is made out of, we understand the planetary relationships that they have. And here in summary, Picatrix is talking about how, I just described how depending on the tithi, depending on the relationship between the sun and the moon in the various signs, affects these 4 elements. And that shapes the nature of all of existence. And so this is like the foundations of elections, is that this is what's happening. And all of our electional principles of, we make it during this one and not during that one, are like more granular delineations and demarcations of describing this phenomena of the alterations of the elements and how it affects us. Next, in order, you ought to search for a place appropriate and suitable in all its effects and convenient for your workings, noting the true and false signs and things that influence this world, both in generation and corruption, so that the place is the kind that will have great power in the world and all its qualities. Similarly, you should seek to make the moon free from impediments and infortunes, and be sure it is not in via combusta, because all workings that are ordained when the moon is in good quality and rightly moving are completed and perfected for good. Whatever you desire will appear with all its effects, and its duration will be according to whether the moon is slow or fast, and whether it appears in the same sign together with one of the infortunes, or descending from the midheaven, or at the end of a sign, or in the last or next to last degrees thereof, for all these harm and weaken the moon. So just in that paragraph, we already should be clicking on our brains a little bit. We just covered some of these principles or some of these aspects that sound familiar. Speed of the moon, whether it's with a fortune or infortune. Yes, I know I need to worry about these things. This is also the case of the moon descends to the descendant or is cadent from the lord of her house, and does not aspect him or is cadent from the ascendant or any other angle, or is conjunct the south lunar node, because the beginning will not be fulfilled, nor will it have any durability. The house of the moon must not be governed by a planet from which the moon is separated, or one to which the moon applies from an angle or from a succeeding house, because when the moon is cadent from an angle or a succeeding house, she is not suited to any work. The descendant, because of the circle of houses, is opposite to the house that is rising. If the moon is in the 9th house, and the lord of the 9th house is cadent from the ascendant, it will be similar to the situation described above. If you find the lord of the moon's house on the ascendant or midheaven, or in the 11th or 5th houses, oriental and direct, everything will be suitable and appropriate for whatever you intend to do. So here we're getting the lion's share of our electional rules that Picatrix particularly cares about. Here's an example. Venus is favorable for all workings related to the activities of youth, happiness, and cosmetics, and Jupiter is assigned to the deed of kings, prelates, and lords. Similarly, Mercury is favorable for all things related to messengers and scribes, just as the favor of the sun is assigned to royal and great operations and to kings, and the favor of moon is associated with learning and news. Thus, according to the aforesaid, you ought to examine all workings and relationships that you wish to put into effect. That is, you should consider the sun and moon and the lords of their exaltations and also the lords of their terms. Next, you should consider the ascendant and midheaven, because when you find these free from the infortunes and trouble, and with their lords in favorable positions, then the work will go well and be accomplished, and its goals will be achieved. This will be even more so if the lord of the ascendant is a fortune, and in the ascendant or another of the angles, or if it's an infortune and favorably placed. Even better than it is to have Jupiter or Venus rising or an aspect of the ascendant, for then the business at hand will proceed easily and obtain a good result, and will accomplish its goal easily and swiftly. This will be even more so if the moon is conjunct with one of the fortunes, that fortune is not diminishing in light or retrograde, because this is appropriate to any working except for captives who hope to escape from their masters, or workings to catch fugitives of any other kind. So again, this is like the root aspect of many of these rules that we just particularly read. And so this I wanted to show, like, yes, there's a worksheet with checkboxes which say like, we want this and we don't want that, but it's also parsed from this text. And there's a lot of granularity that one can start to apply, especially when we get into like looking at the term lords and trying to understand, well, what does this actually mean? And it, Picatrix is saying to understand it and be aware of it, but Picatrix in this chapter isn't always saying how one should be prioritizing each one of these aspects. So how much of it is being a rule that needs to be triaged before others? It's not entirely clear. So thankfully, we've had, a number of years of people putting these into practice to where, including myself, to where I can kind of give you the list that I had given beforehand and say, like, prioritize these 24 different points. And if you're able to get these 24 different points done, then you're going to get something that has like a good result. Is it going to be a miraculous result? Sometimes it's happened, but potentially they're also following some of these other principles. And this is still being worked out. Let me see if I have another highlighted part, because this is quite a lot of microwave repair manual aspect, but quite fun. I lovingly will refer to it in that way. Let's see. Likewise, in all your petitions, make the Lord of the Ascendant fortunate as well as the moon. Oh, wow. Josh really likes the Ascendant and the moon. Why? Because also the author likes it, and it seems to work. If your petition concerns a question of wealth and food, place the part of fortunes that is received by one of the fortunes. Beware of having either of the infortunes block the light of the moon from the ascendant or the contrary. Nor should either of the infortunes be conjunct the Lord of the petition, the moon, or the Lord of the ascendant. Nor should they be in conjunction or any aspect with the Lord of the petition. And where we spoke of reception before, let there be a trine or sextile aspect with one of the fortunes, or similarly with the infortunes, or conjunct with the fortunes. Make sure that the Lord of the petition is not cadent from one of the angles, nor the sun, or the moon, or the Lord of the ascendant. A lot of these principles repeat over and over and over again to favor strengthening benefics, strengthening the fortunes, and having those make direct aspects with the main significator of the planet. If you cannot observe all these points, however, consider the motion of one of the 5 lords of the petition and have it aspect and reception according to the petition, as we have said, and make those 2 houses well received by the fortunes. Make sure that neither infortunes with the Lord of the Moon's house or with the Lord of the 4th house or the Lord of the Ascendant. Because if either of the infortunes is as you said, it will ruin and destroy and impede the success of your working. Masters in service. Thus far, I have spoken generally about the judgments of the stars, for if you apply yourself to them and understand them as you ought, you will gain their benefit in whatever working you may do. And from generalities, you may be able to understand and judge particulars. You should be exceedingly careful that you never reveal the foregoing or show it to anyone who is not intelligent and studious in these matters. You should know that these are the foundations and raw materials of magical images, and they are among those secrets of this art that are demonstrated in public. And for this reason, serious study of the art of astrology was once prohibited by law, because the deep places of that science border the things that must be known in learning the art of magic. Aristotle spoke of this to King Alexander. Oh, Alexander, be careful at every moment and at all your activities that you conduct yourself according to the motions, aspects, and qualities of the celestial bodies. For if you study these things, your desires will be accomplished and you will have whatever you will. This saying is very good and useful because it indicates the difference between the actions of the wise and those of the foolish, who are unable to pass beyond practical considerations, and to whom thoughts concerning another world are shrouded in darkness. For thoughts concerning another world are nothing other than the wisdom that surrounds all sciences and all wisdom teachings. All wisdom teachings.
Can I ask maybe what's an obvious question?
Sure.
I'm confused when they say the word fortunes and infortunes. What is that referring to?
What is a lot of the times fortunes and infortunes are benefic planets and malefic planets,
Got it. Okay.
and or like benefic significators or malefic significators. Because there's also because it could also mean planets contrary to like the goal, contrary to the goal. So there is the element of understanding all of the relationships that will further the goal versus detract from it. And at like the very basic level, it's benefics and from foundational level and malefic planets. But Picatrix also gives these roles where it's like Venus and Mars like abhor the realities in which the other one governs. So one could think beyond just Mars being a malefic planet for a Venusian matter, there's also this extra level of antagonism that a strong Mars or a Mars placed in a certain house or making a specific aspect is going to have on the fruition of the goal or fruition of the planet. Excellent question. Any other questions or thoughts on next? And this one's great because we get this great apocryphal statement of Aristotle to Alexander the Great of like, oh wow, the reason why Alexander the Great was so successful was because he was a master of embodied astrological magic and embodied astrology. Amazing. Interesting comment. Truly interesting comment. And then after this, if it already isn't, I will have this chapter of Picatrix inside our drive for this week. So I encourage everyone over this week, read this and see how, connect what from this little chapter is like inside the what is it? Inside our cheat sheet, and then what isn't inside of it, and then think about like, oh, maybe think like, oh, why isn't it or why isn't it? Why is it or why isn't it? This is something I think I would like to add. If one feels comfortable with the principles that are in the sheet or been electing for a while, feel free to like start pulling in a new principle in order to add to one's electional analysis and, see what happens, see what happens. And then there's probably each a different principle that we all kind of like or want to try out and then get different results and we'll see how it goes. Fantastic. Let me end our recording. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another fantastic session. And what is it? We get to be meeting on Saturday today. So we get to be enjoying meeting together, blessed by the rays of Saturn. So how beautiful. How nice. And today we're going to be primarily, reviewing a couple points on elections that through the past week in conversations and reflecting on the last lessons, left a few things out and because of that, some room to consider some extra points when it comes to which principles of elections for planetary talismans are deeply essential versus we spent a lot of the time last week talking about the dialectical considerations as Picatrix talks about and granularly getting some practice and figuring out like which ones to prioritize over others, as well as how to tease out which aspects are really contributing to the overall results of the election versus detracting from it, and then being able to understand which elements either are tipping it to, oh, we got to make this talisman, to we gotta wait for the next. So a brief couple more points to say on that, and then we're going to be talking a bit more on choosing materials, and then talking a lot more about trying to give and communicate some more philosophical underpinnings of how we're choosing materials or why we're choosing materials. And I hope bringing a bridge between a lot of the study and the work we've done so far about thinking about the images and the nature of the images and seeing that when one is thinking about the image, like the image and election and material that one is using, in our minds and understanding of those three separate aspects, we should be seeing them almost as like the same thing or really contributing to the whole of what our talisman is. And we should be able to weave a nice little thread in between each one. So we have some nice, some nice traditional commentary and some traditional excerpts and texts to review there today. And I think ultimately, I've shared some excerpts for everyone to read and add to the drive for this week, but I think I have to give like a very solid recommendation. Like this is almost required reading if one wants to, I think, coalesce a lot more of what we've read from Picatrix and covered. So that's fun. That's a fun realization I've had this week to tell and share with everyone in this. So let me share some slides. But before, if there's any questions or thoughts or comments before we start, happy to field. Yes. We're finishing on electional points, reviewing materials. We're going to spend a lot of time in those two places today. So one of the things that, what is it? It's always, what is it? It's an interesting phenomenon to gauge the level of background that people have, as well as the level of expertise or familiarity with certain aspects, and then being able to, and then, there's multiple levels of expertise that one gets to have in astrological magic. I think even in the beginning of Picatrix, they talk about like these supporting arts, these 12 or 10 different kinds of like normal sciences, mathematics and geometry and oration, metallurgy and all these skills that, we as the magi, we as the mages are supposed to be like well versed in, or at least familiar with, and in leveraging that into our knowledge of this magic. And, this is mirrored through, I think, all kinds of esoteric teachings I know in, in like the traditional Japanese martial arts that I've done, especially as it like pertains to like the world of ninpo or the arts of like psychological warfare. They talk about like I think it's like the 18 basic skills, and it's like like all your basic weapons and horsemanship and archery, and mixing of poisons and knowledge of stars and all this kind of aspect here. So one thing that we didn't particularly go deep into, which we're gonna go a little deeper than I would have initially have gone into, is this brief discussion on planetary hours and days. And because we're going to talk a little bit about it, I get to bring in, I think, some potentially like very deeper levels onto this, which I think ultimately will provide avenue for future study. So the real reason why we're talking about it is because planetary hours and days, really, these are an essential thing for making a planetary talisman. So like full stop in that way. We're not making a planetary talisman without it being either planetary, day, or hour. And reviewing some elections, that was submitted to me over the past week and a half. This is something that I was not able to communicate. So it's like, oh no, we need to make sure this point is very much covered, to the point to like, we need to be in a spot as someone doing talismanic astrology, making astrological talismans, that like from the moment we wake up and our cognition is online, it's like a talisman requires planetary day or hour, preferably both. Like that should be a mantra and a sound that like reverberates through every cell of our being. For every atom should be inseparable from the knowledge of either planetary day or hour. And like full nonstop, non-negotiable, to the point to where, someone would say, well, Josh, what if I am making a talisman? Like, what about things that aren't made in this way? Then I think it's just a matter of understanding that this is probably one of those things where it's like, they're not making like quote unquote asterisks, like a traditional astrological, magical planetary talisman. That's just what it is. It's just something different. And that's fine. We can have different things, very much pro diversity and pro different ways of manifesting the divine in our lives, but it's just not what we're doing. It's just not the nature of the thing, because something else is happening. Not because one person is saying it in like a dogmatic way, but because like it's just fundamentally different. And some reference for this, there's medieval text called Tantra Loka, and it goes very much into the various kinds of ways in order to measure time and understand the effects of the different ways of measuring time. And it says that the day and night contains 24 periods, 24 hours. And these 24 hours of 900 pranas, or 900 patterns of the breath, and in distinct patterns of the breath and mind, which each give different results. And in these different quantifications of time, there are these hours of time were either unequal, so an hour not being 60 minutes, but still being 24 hours a day, or they were equal. And these were based off of more of these 900 pranas, or these 900 imprints or motions of the mind and the breath. And then there was a third system of time that was based off of sunrise and equal to 60 minutes per hour. And these are called Kalahora or Italian hours. And I needed to double check. I think even like the normal system of planetary hours that we use, I think they are the Kalas, and or in this way, there is one of these Vedic names of the systems of hours that is the general planetary hours that we use. I have to double check because the sources I was using was not fully clear, but I've heard them termed before as like they're like nautical hours or astronomical hours. So where one is measuring the time of sunrise to sunset and then chopping it into 12 equal portions, and then those are the hours. So though that's the derivation of the hours of the hours that we're using for astrological magic, for the talismans that we're making in this form. And then an interesting thing here, and then this is like a table of the hours throughout the day as they repeat through 12-hour period. So, you can like hand calculate this if you want. Generally, there is this is present in your software. AstroGold like brilliantly like hides this piece of like very essential information to the point to where it clearly just goes near to the bottom of my list, but it has one of the cleanest UIs at the same time. So it's just like, we are still a minority in terms of astrological magical practitioners in the world of astrology. We have yet to have the optimal UI, or I have not spent enough time to actually care about it. But the point being is that the planetary hour and or the day is absolutely essential into the creation of astrological talismans, and we have to make sure that that is being reflected. So if that already is not something that you're clicking into your process of determining for your elections, I highly recommend it. And if you're having a hard time sort of clicking into that, then I would recommend even just starting at the very basis, about a basis of just watching how you change, and your cognition changes, your breath changes as you go through either different days of the week, planetary days, understanding those planetary elements, or even the hours of the day and how the hours change. And if one spends time on these points, this is very much like a yogic practice. Like this is very much like in various Indian and South Asian systems. One could frame this level of awareness as being highly connected to understanding one's inner nature or one's inner set of energy relationships, which we will come full circle on today, which is quite good. So I would recommend that if one has never had like a daily planetary prayer practice, or even tried like a daily practice of noticing the shifts of the planetary hours, highly recommend it, because that will give you a visceral understanding of the planets and their combinations that mere contemplation won't necessarily give you. We talked and we read that part in Picketrix where it says, contemplate the planets in each degree of every sign, and then do it in all of the conjunctions. And so this is also a way in which we can do that. This is a way to even ground that into reality. It's like, on a Monday during Jupiter hour, contemplating the nature of the moon and Jupiter together. This is like really bringing it together. And, oh, Josh, well, how's that different from contemplating the moon and Jupiter together on a Thursday? On Jupiter day during moon hour. Well, you can kind of play around with it. Like maybe in one scenario, on Monday, the moon is in domicile and Jupiter isn't, or on a Thursday, Jupiter is stronger relative to the moon. And provides some frameworks for us to contemplate this and see what arises, see what wisdom arises. And in terms of the conversation in the magical world around like, what is it? Like UPG, like unverified personal gnosis or whatever, which is like a hilarious term that I learned about many years ago when I was running magical circles. And it's like, if we're going to be like, if we're going to have like a stigma towards like the knowledge of contemplation and realization that individuals have, and we're going to like scrutinize that, I think a point which would probably be in favor of the realization, if it is related, would be like, well, was it realized related to like one of these time periods? Like, did you have an insight or an understanding around like moon and Jupiter together and that conjunction, or something related to moon and Jupiter when one was doing contemplation on moon day and Jupiter hour? If so, I think that's like very much a point towards the understanding, towards the knowledge. And this is a way I think we can draw down the blessing planets. And this is like pretty supported way. Like realistically, the only belief one needs to have, or an agreement one needs to have, is just an understanding that like the hours and sub hours and sub categorizations of these times matter. And if we're considering that we need to have these categorizations of time in order to make talismans, we've already believed it and baked into it. Like there's no need to cognitively dissonance ourselves like that much, unless you're just, really just experimenting with it and don't know if any of it is real and or works. That's also a totally fine perspective. But if we're going to go as far to say we need planetary day or hour and this matters, and we care about these rules of Picatrix because it relates to this worldview, this is very much a part of that worldview. And a further way we can extend the acceptance or extend how we play with inside that worldview, which is awesome. I think it's really great, really fantastic. And then this is just like one system of ours. And the last thing I'll say is like, this is just one system of ours. This is one system of ways of chopping up and dividing time in order to analyze the quality of results. So in the way that we are going to give lots of care and consideration to these hours and to this day's systems, and use that as a foundational basis of extrapolation for these other rules that exist within Picatrix or Picatrix relates to, and this kinds of magic, there are other systems which have their own unique and valuable kinds of like insights and structures of reality. How beautiful we get to live in a world where these things are like known and practiced, and it's quite excellent. It's quite good indeed. Understanding those is a little bit outside of this class, and definitely outside of like my primary area of practice and knowledge. But I think it's important to know that this is like one of the schools of mathematics. This like we're studying topology, but topology also intersects with discrete mathematics, and there are those out there who are masters of discrete mathematics, but we're going to stay in our relative. Any questions or thoughts or sharing of perspectives on the planetary day and hours?
Just that this time of year, I always find really interesting because now that we've had the time change,
Yes.
because I'm somebody that always has the notifications on my phone. And so now it's sort of like, oh, now I'm doing, like, I'm keeping my routine, but I'm noticing, like, I can't say I'm noticing anything in particular quite yet, but it's more comical, like comical to me. It's like, oh, now this is my now, like, Mars activity of the day. Like,
Definitely. Definitely. That's a good insight. And then, one has to wonder, because people will sort of describe like, oh, the time changes. Well, everything feels off. And or things continue to feel even months afterwards. And it's like, well, you would think we would adjust to it a certain way. But if you're used to doing everything within a certain planetary hour and now it's just fully shifted, it changes. There's a qualitative aspect that changes everything. And of course it's off. Like, of course it's off after our mere biologies have been able to adjust. But within this worldview, I think we would even say, or you could even argue that, you know, our biologies don't really fully adjust. That there's always something that is changed. And so, it's time to do some major one may need to do major shifts. Major shifts when the world starts to expecting you act differently or act to a full hour offset, which is totally normal, which is, there's a good precedent for this, especially considering that you like, what is it? Just like the timing of the planetary days and hours and the like the astrological planets, the positions of the planets were used to like determine when and they're still used today to determine like festivals, large periods of worship, ritual sacrifices. It's like, yes, this matters. Like, it very much matters and plays a role. So part of one of the things that does happen, I think, when we become hyper attuned to this magic and are real practitioners and magi like this, is I think we do become more sensitive to these things because we become more aware of it. And we open our mind to a greater realm of afflictions, but we also expand our toolkits and our availability to understand the inputs of these things, which is one could say a blessing and a curse, but I think it's a blessing. So in light of our discussion of the planetary days and hours and some of the conversations that we were having in our Wednesday practice, was like understanding that there's, I would say now one could think that there's like three sets of rules or there's three sets of electional considerations. There's like I am framing it, or within my own capacity, I think of it in three different buckets, which is like there are non-negotiable principles that have to be being followed, which is like planetary day and hour of the planetary day or planetary hour, or maybe preferably both, of the main significator of the planetary talisman. Like that needs to be a non-negotiable. Also, in that way, I would also it also is that that main planetary significator needs to be rising on the ascendant or culminating in heaven. And we reviewed this rule or this suggestion from Picatrix, I think 2 classes ago at this point. They do kind of say it in that way because they don't particularly reference any other aspect in that. So those would probably be like the 2 non-negotiable points: planetary day or hour, then midheaven or ascendant conjunction from the main planetary significator. And then once we have that done, then we get to do it like a dialectical review of all of the points in which we spend the majority of our time last week looking at, which is like those 17 different points, or adding plus ones and minus ones and kind of getting an overall evaluation of the collection. And then 3 is a more of like a refined consideration, which is, well, what are other rules besides this? What are other things that are mentioned within Picatrix? A big one that we talked about had to do with like lunar phase, because Picatrix is very specific, a little bit depending on the result one is looking for of the talisman, considering that the lunar phase, whether it's waxing or waning, full of light or lacking light, in that consideration. Also, I would consider like cadency from the Lord into this, as well as the placement of the planetary significator or even the rising sign in the term placement. That particular rule that Picatrix goes into. And and what is it? Potentially some of the rules within the dialectical review and the refining considerations. Some of these may need to be like swapped around a bit, and that's definitely fine. We also may find that individually as the magus, there may be certain rules either from the dialectical review or the refined, that have their lines blurred a little bit. That one needs to give more care to rather than the others. And that's kind of fine. I think that that's really chalked up to our own individual natures that we have and are using to interface with the celestial powers. And I think I have some definitely the what I have shared in the group for our requested reading this week, and probably some points that we'll cover today relate to this as well. Any questions or clarifying points or other thoughts on this? Sure. As everyone knows, this is one of the most thoroughly debated aspects of talisman making, has to do with the elections. And, you know, I think the final thing, I think my final perspective and ultimate perspective is to the degree that certain people will say, I think really only Chris Warnock, and I understand, and I say this all the time, I understand why he says it, that there's no like one right way to make an astrological talisman. There definitely seems to be better ways. And there certainly are safer and more like risk proportionate ways in which to make an astrological talisman. So that's what I would say. And so this system here is reflective of those assumptions. That certain ways are better than others, and that certain ways are safer than others. And so we're optimizing towards the most powerful, safest, and what is it? Also, I think a little bit of we're here to learn as much as we can from the process of making it as well. Then also a quick point of some of the quick points that should be in the back of our mind in terms of, I call them here like election savers, but things that really quickly turn the tides of an election in terms of like very beneficial, very beneficial. I could have made also like an election killer list, but less. I think those are thoroughly talked about more in the dialectical analysis. But certainly for the election savers, like a benefic on the ascendant to remedy lunar affliction, like a very dignified and strong ascendant lord, regardless if it's the main significator or not of the talisman. And then also, and this is definitely more of a personal one, but it's something that I challenge everyone, and I've probably already heard me challenge people in the recordings a little bit, is thinking about when a significator is stronger than rather than its affliction by aspects. I'm thinking or considering like, oh, is this aspect how big of a problem it's going to be, or do I need to fully pass on this election, considering all the other points? These are three things that I pretty much am considering all the time and give me pause in terms of do we need to pass on this or do we not? Gosh. And part of this list also has been created with an understanding of there's certain things people like there are people will prioritize and have very different considerations in terms of what they find is either supporting the fruition of them creating an election or not. Like I remember having this conversation with someone where I think it was either like really nice, really fantastic election by all these points that I talk about all the time. But it was like either the mid-heaven lord was afflicted or it was being, or maybe there was like a node on the midheaven, or it even could have been Saturn, and someone was like, "Oh yeah, no, this talisman seems like something where, like, yes, you could like get a lot of money, but no one would think that you're wealthy." And I was like, who fucking cares about that? Like, it's like no one, like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? Someone's like, well, if you don't care about people thinking that you're very wealthy and successful, then yeah, then I guess it doesn't matter. And the fact that would be a consideration that someone would have as being just as important as like the ascendant lord and like the actual significator of the working going to fruition, because they were showing me elections of that were that were bad, that like that I say would bad that are bad, that could like maybe harm you or that wouldn't actually produce result, but they were prioritizing this. I wouldn't even call them like tertiary or quaternary considerations. It's like perceptions of others as the result of this magic, which is important to the sense where it's like you don't want to be creating talismans that have a side effect of like creating you enemies, which is why we care about the descendant. And we chatted a little bit on the last week of sometimes having situations where actually I don't even know if we talked about it in class. I think I was talking about it with my other colleagues in person, but in Picatrix petitions, and this we'll go over this when I do them. bonus petition class, but part of it talks about how you want the seventh lord. Sometimes you want the seventh lord afflicted. You just want it just like getting the crap absolutely beaten out of it. And it's like you want your enemies to be fully decimated. Like if you are the first house and sometimes you want the seventh. You want the people who are opposing you to be in a weaker position. Which makes total sense if you're like a king or a lord or something, you want people to be always subservient to you. And then there's the question of like, oh, like, the seventh lord could also be like your business partner or your lover or, something like this. And it's like, oh, well, you don't want, do you want to be subtly dominating all the people that like care about you in your life or that you care about? And it's like, it was really funny because someone was saying that, and then I was like, look, you just had your partner make us breakfast this morning. Like, seems like you do actually enjoy that kind of life, like very, very well, which is also like an important part. Like we need to, not deceive ourselves a little bit in terms of I think our I don't know, our like ethics and morals and how we actually live our life. Like that's like a big thing. Like we should strive to have as much congruency between those two things as possible. If only because it's like just like a very honest thing to do, and it's like good to I think it's good to be honest and like kind and genuine with people. And two, I think it also, and it's not just like a fully altruistic thing too, which primarily is the driver, but I think it becomes like interestingly a powerful point of negotiation and leverage spiritually as well with other people when it's like you are able just to live what you believe. That like promotes trust and it kind of works regardless of like where you stand. Like I've even seen situations like even people who have very like harsh opinions or have very like harsh beliefs or different beliefs, like the fact that they're like very honest about it and clear about it, it just allows you to understand how to deal with them appropriately. And there's inherent sattva to that. There's inherent balance to it to understand like, this is a person that likes to fight others when they get drunk. Or like, this is a person that like becomes violent when provoked, rather than like, it's interesting how I think sometimes, maybe it's just me, there we will handle those people better, or we like those people better, or we are more comfortable with that level of reality rather than someone who's like fully deceptive and deceiving of others and pretending that they're like kind and considerate, but actually stabbing people in the back. There's like a certain level of like divine justice rage, I think, that can get like provoked in those sort of individuals, which is, I don't know, for me, it's like my worst fear is that, and I project that. But I think it's we don't want to. Oh, what is it? This is also an element of how I approach things. In the beginning, talking about Varuna. Varuna is the devata of like getting your fruits and your punishments immediately as one's actions happen. So this is also a little bit element of myself in here. But I think the planets like this. I think it's also interesting because if you think about the planets being sort of like the planets are consistent. And that's like an interesting aspect about them is that like Mars is always going to be co-ruler of glass. Mars is always has their fingers in the pit of passion and war and blood and and giving orders. Like that's not going to change unless it does. And then that's particularly interesting because why something very strong must be happening for that to waver or that to shift, like dignity, like a shift in essential dignity, potentially. But if we ourselves are able to cultivate like these immovable natures of ourselves or immovable positions, consistency, this makes us more like the planets. This makes us more like the forces which control reality. And I would surmise and propose that one of the reasons why the grahas and the planets and the stars control reality has to do with how consistent they are able to exert influence into the realms in which they do. That is one of the points. So this is important. This is definitely important. So I mean, slightly digress, but I think to a very, very good point. And then again, at the smaller level of how we practice, this is the reason why we don't like our ascendant Lord afflicted, or we don't like we want a strong ascendant Lord, is because we want strong consistency. We want a strong root. That is why this idea of like rooting a talisman to the natal chart, to one's natal situation, or to our own individual lives, has some credence, has some like interesting power here. we're about to get into, I think we're about to get into materials and talk a little bit about Marcelo Ficino, but, one of the parts I had marked in his 3 books on life is just like, that I've been staring at like all morning is like the specific rule for an individual would be to investigate which star promised what good to the individual at his nativity, to beg grace from that star rather than from another, and to await from any given star not just any gift and what belongs to other stars, but a gift proper of that one. And it like very much is like the hearing that lots of things should begin to align and come together in a way consistent of how we've been thinking, how we've been practicing, and how we've been engaging in this art. And if not, definitely tell me or tell the group, because we can like work on we can work on that. If it isn't happening, it's good to talk about it, because then we can understand the deviances, not like us being deviances, but like oh my gosh, there is another D word I'm thinking of, but the divergences of our minds from the worldview in which we're attempting to participate in, or at least how I like to ground a lot of this in, which flows very, very well to the next point in the next slide, which is this discussion on talisman materials. Hey, Lama Hunkaranata here. Great work at making it to the end of my module on talismanic elections, which is one of 12 modules in my talisman making masterclass. If there are any questions that arose from watching the module, or if there's any follow-up points you'd like to ask me regarding talismanic elections, please don't hesitate to follow up. I'll be happy to answer. And if you're interested in learning more about the talisman making masterclass, or the 12-week hands-on process where I walk you through all of the information inside the modules called Catching Starlight, please follow the link below. Otherwise, blessings of Jupiter upon you, and see you on the other side.